So they're extremely disarming and really good about that. So that's really how they're using it. National Geographic Channel had a very different objective. They wanted to use this to promote the show Air Force One. Interesting thing there was that they had about 3 weeks to get this going. This was a one-time special, and we said we'll only work with you on it. Twitter would be a great fit. We did an interview with a pilot who flew W around. It was a lot of fun. You know, the interview was all on Twitter. You know, took questions. So it fit in really well with that brand. Their audience was there. But then we said, well, but this is a one-time special. You guys really need to just take this over yourselves and own this. And so we helped them transition to it. But you know, we got a couple thousand followers for that. But now they've got tens of thousands of followers. They rebranded it as @NatGeo Channel, and have done a phenomenal job keeping this going for quite some time, and really internalized it. So they had a very different objective here, used it in a totally different way, and did a good job matching this to their objectives. So getting into the arsenal, this is clearly the thing to avoid. You know, that social media checklist where it's like, you know, someone's like, just get me on Twitter, or doing something for the sake of doing it. We'll show one dangerous example of that in a minute. With H&R Block, it wasn't just Twitter. You know, there were a lot of aspects of it, and with them, what was clear was that all these channels play very different roles. So there's a big difference between being a friend of a brand on MySpace and being a fan of it on Facebook. And you know, there were some channels that were better for listening, some were better for participating. So they all had these different roles, leading back to the same overall objective. So, you know, in doing so, though, the one thing that was clear was that H&R Block, like any brand out there, they needed some kind of coherent architecture. So they needed some way to actually tell the story. So, yeah, these are all sample architectures, but you could have all these different channels like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and you name it, just pointing directly back to the brand. So ideally, also, you'll see that they'd link to each other there in some way, so that if you're on the YouTube, if you're on the brand's YouTube page, you know, you can easily find out where conversations are going on Twitter, and try to, you know, keep people engaged and keep that flow to it. So you know, you might create a newly created hub like a microsite. You know, you might use your existing website as a hub. You might not even have an essential hub to it. You might have something like, you've seen some of these alternate reality games where there are things like going back and forth in a lot of different directions. You might just be interacting with people in such different ways that that it's not all about getting to them to your site. Your site might just be one spoke in all of this. That's where other channels are extremely important. You know, Skittles kind of had that hub mentality, but Skittles.com was just one little part of what they were doing, and actually Facebook has kind of emerged as their central hub when they redesigned their social strategy last year. And so there's no right answer, but it is helpful to give this some thought about how, you know, you're using this arsenal out there to connect with what you're doing. As far as how it can play out, you know, one of the things in sparking the word, so, you know, we worked on something with blog outreach for raising awareness of a DVD, this adorable, like, Very Monkey Christmas thing for Curious George. And so the thing was, like, the DVD was already out there, and the bloggers had no shortage of interactions with brands, especially mommy bloggers that we're looking at. So it came down to creating an experience around this. You know, what wasn't done yet was creating an event based on the movie and encouraging moms to do so, see if they wanted these kind of party packs and share their own events. And so, so there were 40 dedicated posts. We weren't trying to get thousands of posts out there, but by figuring out who made sense to, who really could spread this buzz and who'd want to take part in this, then it was able to reach a wide audience. Also, when it says 59% favorable, that's not to say the rest was unfavorable. It was more like there was just a lot of neutral coverage out there that was just, you know, mentioning the DVD and the event itself, and not being as emotional as these adorable kids and their moms were. So then ultimately, you know, you've got your goals, you know, you've got your arsenal. You have to make sure that it really fits with, you know, what your target audience is doing, how they're using these channels, And this came up a lot during this higher education session yesterday at McGraw-Hill, and so there were like a lot of great ideas for professors, but they were so foreign to how professors are actually engaged with students at all. And so some things really needed to be like professors needed to adopt to social media, but social media also needed to adapt to the classroom. So with the rules of the road, I'll present 6, and they're pretty straightforward, but with a little bit of a travel metaphor, some near and dear to my heart. So rule number 1 is really when you're visiting somewhere, you need to learn the language. And this is true if you're in Paris or Moscow or where I was on my honeymoon and met these 2 adorable kids standing right outside the Taj Mahal that actually says, welcome to the Taj Mahal, I think, if Google Translate or whatever is accurate. If not, then if no one here can read it, then I'm totally safe. This comes up in social media too. So it's definitely a language that it's clear, if you can speak it, or as a lot of these speakers and devotees of EventCamp do, or if you're just kind of like on the sidelines and kind of being out there. So it becomes very clear, and it definitely requires some language learning. When I was on a trip to the Middle East 10 years ago, one guide really said it so wonderfully that you can either be a tourist or a pilgrim. She was saying this to a bunch of tourists, so I guess it was a little insulting at the time, but she meant it in a really good way. And the fact is that when I travel, and probably most of us travel, we're much more like tourists. We're planning a brief stay, we're taking pictures, grabbing a few souvenirs, and then like, oh crap, I only have 3 vacation days left this year, and so we're going on home. With the ideal, which is a little more feasible with social media, although it requires quite a bit of commitment too, but you're planning to stay a while. You're bringing your whole arsenal that you have with you, and you're trying to build communities. And it just resonated so well that Ilona, who is my guide, I've got to try to look her up, because she'd probably get a kick out of this 10 years later, that me bastardizing everything she said and using it for a business presentation. Maybe this isn't her, although kind of looked like her too. It's also very clear, who's a pilgrim and who's a tourist. So I don't want to call out too many negatives here. This one was just so blatantly obvious that I felt that, and it's a very public example. So Delta Airlines, they got on Twitter last spring, and so then they had this post June 17th. This isn't Photoshopped. This is just taking a screenshot of 2 back-to-back posts. They went from June 17th to December 22nd. So in all that time, you can imagine there were probably discussions about travel and airlines and them. And this was their last post. They're celebrating 80 years of nonstop service, but they were social media was hardly a nonstop. They were stopping service and just not even telling anyone that we'll be back in a little while, so come find us then. It was just a dead stop, and then they come back like, oh, so check the weather before you fly. And and they've just recently started to discover the whole @ thing in terms of replying to people, but hardly to the degree you'd expect from an airline. And you see the difference between Delta, which I actually enjoy flying in the U.S. at least, and JetBlue, which has made this kind of commitment, and JetBlue, Southwest, a lot of these others, they put a lot of resources in doing so, and have earned more respect from the community in the process. I mean, this is just the danger of it, though, when you have that checklist approach and you're going in blind and you don't quite know what you're doing with it, and then and then they're violating one of the biggest rules. You have to pack appropriately. Still, you want to bring everything you have with you, whether it's your strategy or your team, or your passion, maybe the most important part of it.